The Legends of King Arthur. 12 Rebel Kings. Retold by Tracy Mayhew, illustrated by Mike Phillips. Chapter 1. Arthur Pendragon had been king for 4 years. He had done a lot to make Britain safer. He had defeated warlords, settled feuds, and made sure that all in his kingdom were well cared for. Seeing his successes, many other kings had pledged their loyalty, acknowledging Arthur as High King, but not all. Lot, King of Lothian, in Scotland, thought that he would make a far better king of Britain than Arthur. He already had the support of 10 other kings on his side. Lot sent word to Camelot that he and his men wanted to meet in battle to decide, once and for all, who should rule. Arthur accepted the challenge. As his army marched, Arthur sent scouts ahead. When reports came back that Lot and his men were only 3 days' ride away, Arthur told his men to set up camp on the edge of Bedegreen Forest to await them. That way, when the two armies met, Arthur's would be rested, whilst King Lot's would be tired from the journey. In the meantime, Arthur and his men would practice their swordplay. It was during one such practice between Arthur and his friend Pellinore that the sword in the stone broke in half. All around them the dueling stopped as people realized what had happened. Arthur could only stare at the broken blade. The sword had been old, and he was no longer the scared little farm boy who had pulled it free. But still. "This sword made me king," he murmured. "Your Majesty, forgive me," Pellinore begged, looking horrified. "I never." "Stop!" Arthur interrupted. "It is better it happen now, amongst friends, than when we face the enemy in battle." He retrieved the broken piece from the grass. "But I will need another sword." Even as he said it, Arthur could not imagine anything replacing the famous sword in the stone. "Perhaps I can help?" They turned as Merlin approached. In the years since Arthur had become king, Merlin had hardly changed. Arthur, however, looked completely different. His blonde hair was longer, and he had grown a beard that he kept neatly trimmed. Years of weapons drills and wearing armor had given him muscles he never had as a boy. "I have seen a sword in my dreams," Merlin continued. "A sword so great, it will drive fear into the hearts of your enemies." Arthur's brother Kay raised his eyebrows. "Sounds like a sword worthy of a king. Where is it?" "A day's ride from here." Arthur was incredulous. "A day's ride?" "Merlin, I am about to lead my men into battle. I cannot abandon them for a whole day." He shook his head. "We have swords here. I'll use one of those." "Your Majesty, you don't understand. I understand that it has taken too long to win these men's trust for me to leave them on the brink of battle to fetch a sword, sire. This is not just any sword." "It is Excalibur?" Arthur and the others stared blankly. "It was made in Avalon," Merlin added. That piqued Arthur's interest. "Your homeland?" "Indeed, so it's a magic sword?" Kay asked. Merlin smiled. "Not quite. But there is no other sword like it in the whole of Britain. With Excalibur in your hand, sire, you will never need another weapon. I suppose if one sword can win me a crown, another might help me to keep it," Arthur mused. "How do we find this Excalibur?" "There is a lake not far from here." "The Lady of the Lake awaits us there?" Arthur looked surprised. "She knows we're coming?" "Yes, Your Majesty." Arthur turned to Kay. "Will you take charge whilst I'm gone?" "It would be my honor." "Well, Merlin," Arthur declared, "let's not keep your lady waiting." Chapter 2. Arthur galloped across the open plain, enjoying the feeling of freedom. Thanks to his latest campaign, it had been a long while since he had let Lamrii, his black mare, run freely. Lamrii, it seemed, was just as keen to escape the camp as he was. But Arthur knew they had to return as soon as they could. King Lot's forces were less than 2 days away now. Are we almost there? Arthur called, as he slowed to let Merlin catch up. The lake is just beyond that hill. As they reached the top of the hill, Arthur reined Lamai to a stop beside Merlin. Below, the lake stretched out before them, its surface as smooth and clear as a looking glass. Hidden from the rest of the world, it was silent and peaceful. But there was no woman in sight. "Where is the lady you spoke of, Merlin?" Arthur asked, feeling his horse begin to fidget. "She is here." Confused, Arthur nudged Lamrai forwards, following Merlin's steed down the hill to the shore. Dismounting, Arthur tied the reins to a nearby tree. He kept scanning the banks. "I don't see anyone." Saying nothing, Merlin walked to the lake's edge. He bent down and dipped his fingers into the water, sending ripples across its surface. Arthur sighed impatiently. "Merlin, I dash," but he fell silent when the water took on a golden light. Arthur could only stare in wonder as the glow seemed to concentrate in the center of the lake, where the water began swirling and rising into the air. Gradually, it took on the shape of a woman. Who dash? Arthur spluttered, pointing a shaking finger. "She is the lady of the lake," Merlin replied, smiling. Arthur was captivated. The lady was beautiful. She had golden hair that fell around her shoulders and a white dress that shone in the sun. She smiled radiantly at Arthur and began moving gracefully towards him. "How is she walking on water?" Arthur gasped. Rather than answer, Merlin laid a hand on Arthur's back and urged him forwards. Unable to resist the silent command, or the woman's beauty, Arthur stepped into the lake. He met the lady partway, where the water reached his thighs. "We meet at last, Arthur Pendragon." Her soft voice echoed inside his head. Her lips had not moved. "My lady," Arthur replied, bowing his head. His eyes landed on the sword in her hands. The crossguard was gold and the pommel had a blood-red stone at its center. The blade alone was longer than his old sword had been, and it seemed to hold just as much light as it reflected. Droplets of water slid down it in slow motion. Arthur tore his gaze free. The lady of the lake smiled at him. "Kneel." Powerless to refuse, Arthur knelt, not caring that the cool water now ringed his waist, or that the lady towered above him. "Arthur, I give you Excalibur. With it you will defeat those who stand against you and bring peace to the land." Reaching out, Arthur took the sword and gazed in awe at the crossguard, 2 dragons entwined. "It's beautiful," he whispered. "It is not all that I have to give you." A plain black leather scabbard materialized in her hand. "This scabbard is yet more powerful than the sword. With this at your side, your enemies can harm but not kill